I was less than 12 hours away from walking down the aisle when my phone lit up with a notification that should never have existed. Electronic signature verified. For a split second, I smiled. I assumed it was another wedding confirmation, maybe the florist, maybe the hotel, maybe one last document from our venue. Then I looked closer. Personal guarantee approved. Amount $4,800,000. My smile disappeared. I frowned and opened the file. The borrower wasn't me. It was my fiancé's family company, Mercer Infrastructure. I stared at the screen for several long seconds, convinced there had to be some mistake. I had spent nearly 20 years working in banking. I knew exactly what a personal guarantee meant. It meant someone had agreed to risk everything they owned if the borrower failed. Their savings, their retirement, their home, their future. And somehow, my name was on it. I checked the signature. It looked exactly like mine. Every curve, every stroke, every tiny flourish I developed after signing thousands of documents over the years. Except, I had never signed it. My hands suddenly turned cold. I logged into the bank's secure portal using my employee credentials. The audit trail loaded. The document had been submitted 43 minutes earlier, while I was standing in a bridal boutique, having my wedding dress steamed for tomorrow. I scrolled farther. Then I saw something that made my stomach drop. The electronic signature hadn't been stolen from some random database. It had been uploaded from a laptop registered to Daniel Mercer, the man I was supposed to marry the next morning. I didn't call the police, not yet. Instead, I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. His voice was warm, relaxed, exactly the way it had sounded for the past 5 years. "Hey, sweetheart, you should be asleep by now. Big day tomorrow." I closed my eyes. Then I asked him the only question that mattered. "Daniel, if your family's business was about to lose everything, would you tell me the truth?" There was a brief pause. Then he laughed softly. "Claire, there are no secrets between us." That was the exact moment. I knew the wedding was over. Not because of the $4.8 million. Not because someone had forged my signature. But because I had just handed the man I loved one final chance to tell me the truth. And he chose to lie. My name is Claire Bennett. Less than 12 hours later, more than 500 guests gathered inside one of Milwaukee's most beautiful wedding venues, waiting for me to walk down the aisle. Instead, I walked into the building through the service entrance, with my attorney and a federal investigator. The strange thing about betrayal is that it almost never begins with shouting. It begins with ordinary moments that only become suspicious after the truth comes out. That Friday was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. The rehearsal dinner had gone perfectly. Daniel's father had stood to give a toast about family. His mother cried while talking about how blessed she felt to finally have the daughter she never had. Everyone applauded. Everyone smiled. Looking back, I don't think a single person at that table believed a word they were saying. Except me. For 5 years, I honestly believed I had found the kind of family people spend their whole lives searching for. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 34 years old. A senior commercial lending manager at First Lakes National Bank in Milwaukee. Numbers had always made sense to me. People, not so much. My father passed away when I was 12. Cancer. My mother worked 2 nursing jobs until the day I graduated college. She taught me 3 rules that shaped every financial decision I ever made. Never borrow money you can't repay. Never mix love with debt. Never sign anything you haven't read twice. She repeated those rules so often. They became part of who I was. Ironically, the only time I ever forgot them was because I fell in love. I met Daniel Mercer during a charity fundraiser for children's hospitals. He wasn't flashy. He didn't arrive in a sports car. He wasn't the loudest man in the room. He simply offered me his jacket after an unexpected spring rain soaked everyone leaving the ballroom. We talked for nearly 2 hours over terrible coffee. He listened far more than he spoke. When I apologized for talking too much about banking, he smiled. "I like women who understand responsibility." Those words stayed with me, because responsibility had defined my entire life. Daniel came from one of Milwaukee's oldest construction families. Mercer Infrastructure had built office towers, schools, and medical facilities throughout Wisconsin for nearly 40 years. His father, Richard Mercer, carried himself like every handshake closed $1 million deal. His mother, Evelyn, had perfect manners, perfect clothes, perfect timing. She remembered birthdays, sent handwritten thank you cards, always called me our Claire. His younger brother, Ethan, joked that after the wedding I'd finally make their family financially organized. Everyone laughed, including me, now. I wonder if that joke had ever really been a joke. During our engagement, there were little moments that should have bothered me. Daniel occasionally asked vague questions about banking regulations, not because he wanted to learn, because he always seemed interested in what banks could and couldn't detect. How long does fraud usually stay hidden? What triggers an internal audit? Can electronic signatures really be traced? Every time. He wrapped the questions inside casual conversation. I assumed he was simply curious. After all, construction companies borrowed money constantly. I never imagined he was collecting information. 6 months before the wedding, Richard asked if I would look over a loan proposal. Nothing official, he said. I just trust your judgment. I spent nearly 3 hours reviewing their projections. Something felt off. The projected revenue looked unusually optimistic. The cash flow assumptions were aggressive. I told Richard exactly that. He smiled, folded the papers, and never mentioned them again. Daniel kissed my forehead that night. I love how honest you are. I thought he was proud of me. Now I realize they were measuring me, trying to determine whether I'd ignore red flags for the sake of family. I didn't. So they found another way. By the week of the wedding, everything seemed perfect. Our venue overlooked Lake Michigan. 520 guests had RSVP'd. My mother had spent nearly a year sewing tiny lace details inside my veil by hand. She said every stitch was a prayer. She passed away 6 months before the wedding. Cancer again. Sometimes life has a cruel sense of symmetry. That veil became the last thing she ever made for me, the last gift I would ever receive from her hands. I promised myself I would wear it with pride. I had no idea. I would never wear it at all. The afternoon before the wedding, Daniel insisted I spend the day relaxing. No work, he laughed. No spreadsheets. No bank emails. Just be a bride. For the first time in years, I actually listened. I left my work phone inside my apartment, something I almost never did. When I finally picked it up later that evening, there were 17 missed notifications from our internal security system. At first, I assumed another manager had accidentally copied me on an investigation. Then I opened the first alert, and my entire future changed in less than 30 seconds. I read the alert 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, because my brain refused to accept it. Unrecognized access attempt. Employee credentials used to review restricted commercial lending files. Location, Mercer Infrastructure Headquarters. Time, 4:18 p.m. I stared at the screen. That wasn't possible. My work laptop was sitting on the dining table. My security token was in my purse. And I had spent the entire afternoon getting my nails done with 2 bridesmaids who could confirm exactly where I had been. A second notification appeared. Electronic signature verification requested. Then a third. High-value commercial loan package opened. Every banker develops instincts after enough years in the industry. Mine started screaming. Someone wasn't just looking at files. Someone was trying to become me. I immediately called our bank's internal fraud department. A woman named Karen answered after 2 rings. Commercial Security Division. This is Claire Bennett. My credentials are showing activity I didn't authorize. Her keyboard began clicking. 1 moment, Ms. Bennett. Silence. Then, could you tell me where you are right now? I'm at my apartment. Another pause. According to our records, she spoke carefully. Your security token authenticated from Mercer Infrastructure's executive conference room about 20 minutes ago. Every muscle in my body tightened. That's impossible. Do you still have your token? I opened my purse. The small black authentication device sat exactly where it always did. I have it. Karen stopped typing. Don't use your work laptop. Don't approve anything. I'm freezing every credential connected to your profile. Someone is attempting to access a loan application requiring senior lending authorization. The words landed like ice water. Senior lending authorization. Only 4 people in our department had that level of access. I was one of them. Do you know which loan? I'm sorry. I can't discuss client information over an unsecured line. But, she lowered her voice. Whoever is doing this knew exactly which employee possessed the necessary authority. My heartbeat slowed. Not from relief, from clarity. This wasn't random. Someone had planned it. Karen. If anyone calls claiming to be me, it won't be me. I understand. We've already locked the account. I'll need you at the office first thing Monday morning. Monday. I almost laughed. By Monday? I'd be married. By Monday. My legal name would be Claire Mercer. By Monday. Every investigation involving Mercer Infrastructure would suddenly involve my husband's family. The timing was almost too perfect. I thanked Karen, hung up, and sat completely still. Outside my apartment window, Milwaukee traffic rolled by exactly as it always had. People crossed streets, couples carried grocery bags. Someone walked a golden retriever past my building. The world hadn't changed. Mine had. My phone buzzed again. Daniel. I watched his name appear. Normally. His calls made me smile. Tonight, they made my stomach tighten. Hey, beautiful, his voice sounded relaxed. Everything okay? Yeah, I kept my tone perfectly even. What are you doing? Dad wanted me to stop by the office. We're finishing some paperwork before tomorrow. Paperwork. Interesting choice of words. What kind of paperwork? Oh, he laughed. You know my dad. Always working. Nothing exciting. I walked toward my kitchen window. Still at the office. Yeah, probably another hour. In the background, I heard a copier. Someone closing a conference room door. Then Richard's voice, muted, too far away to understand. Daniel immediately lowered his own voice. I should go? Dad needs something. I'll see you tomorrow. I love you. There was a time. Those 4 words erased every worry I had. Tonight, they sounded rehearsed. I love you too. The lie tasted bitter. After the call ended, I opened our engagement photo. Daniel had one arm around my shoulders. We were standing on the shore of Lake Michigan, laughing at something I no longer remembered. I zoomed in, not because I was looking for proof, because I desperately wanted to find the man I thought I knew. I couldn't. Instead, I remembered something he'd said 2 months earlier. We'd been eating dinner after house hunting. He smiled and said, You know what I love most about marrying you? I joked. My cooking? He laughed. No. I love that I never have to worry. You're the safest person I've ever met. Back then, I thought he meant emotionally. Now, I wondered if he'd meant financially. My phone vibrated once more. This time, it wasn't Daniel. It was an email. Subject, loan documentation, final review. No sender name, just an encrypted internal address. Attached was a PDF, 38 pages. The client name was blacked out. But one section hadn't been fully redacted. Borrower, Mercer Infrastructure Holdings, LLC. I stopped breathing. Someone had accidentally, or intentionally, sent me part of the file they were trying to access. I opened the financial statements. 3 pages in. My banking instincts confirmed what my heart already feared. The revenue numbers didn't match the audited statements Richard had shown me months earlier. Assets had been inflated. Outstanding liabilities had quietly disappeared. Projected contracts didn't exist. Whoever submitted this package was asking the bank for nearly $40 million, using financial statements that couldn't possibly survive an audit. Then I reached the signature page. Borrower, Richard Mercer. Corporate guarantor, Daniel Mercer. Senior lending approval. Blank. Accept. Someone had already typed my name beneath it. Claire Bennett, Senior Commercial Lending Manager, approval pending. My hands went cold. They weren't trying to steal money from me. They were trying to steal something far more valuable, my professional reputation. If that approval ever went through, every investigator would assume I had signed off on fraudulent financial statements. Even if I proved someone forged my authorization, I'd spend years explaining why my future husband's company had access to my credentials. I finally understood why the wedding couldn't be postponed. why everything had to happen tomorrow. Because once I became Claire Mercer, the conflict of interest would become infinitely harder to untangle. And if the fraud surfaced months later, I'd already be family, not an outsider, a participant. I slowly closed my laptop, then reached for my phone. There was only one person in Milwaukee I trusted more than my own instincts. Someone my mother trusted long before she trusted me, former federal prosecutor, now white-collar defense attorney, Margaret Ellis. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly 3 years, but as I stared at the forged approval page, I realized one thing with terrifying certainty. Tomorrow was no longer my wedding day. It was the deadline before someone tried to make me the perfect scapegoat. Margaret Ellis answered on the second ring. "Claire?" Her voice carried the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades talking frightened people through impossible situations. "I haven't heard from you in years," I swallowed. "I think someone is trying to use me to commit bank fraud." Silence. Not shocked silence, professional silence. The kind that meant she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Are you alone?" "Yes." "Good. I'll be at your apartment in 45 minutes. "I don't think this should wait until morning." She hung up before I could say another word. That alone told me how serious she believed the situation was. I gathered everything onto my dining table, my work phone, the security alerts, the suspicious loan package, the email, my authentication token. Every instinct from years in commercial banking told me one rule. When fraud is involved, paper trails save innocent people. 40 minutes later, someone knocked twice. Exactly twice. Margaret hadn't changed. Dark navy coat, leather briefcase, gray hair pulled into the same neat bun I remembered from my mother's funeral. She hugged me once, briefly, then immediately went to work. "Show me everything. No small talk, no sympathy, just facts." I appreciated that. By midnight, every document covered my dining table. Margaret didn't interrupt while I explained. She read every email, compared every timestamp, made handwritten notes in the margins. Finally, she leaned back. "This wasn't thrown together." "No, it wasn't." She tapped the forged approval page. "They've been building this for months." I nodded slowly. "I think so too." She looked directly at me. "No, I don't think. I know." That sentence settled over the room like concrete. She pointed toward the financial statements. "Remember 6 months ago when Richard asked for your opinion?" "Yes." "That wasn't because he respected your expertise. He wanted to know exactly how much fraud you would tolerate before objecting." I remembered every detail. The unrealistic revenue projections, the inflated valuations, his smile after I criticized the numbers. At the time, I'd thought he appreciated honest feedback. Now, I realized he had been conducting an interview. Margaret continued. "When you refused to approve weak projections, they changed strategies. Instead of convincing me, they planned to impersonate me." My stomach turned. She opened another folder. "Tell me about your relationship with Daniel." I hesitated, then answered honestly. "He never asked me for money. He never pressured me. He always encouraged my career." Margaret nodded. "Did he ever ask technical questions about banking?" I almost laughed. "Constantly." I repeated every conversation I could remember. Electronic signatures, internal audits, approval limits, credential security. Each memory felt harmless by itself. Together, they formed a blueprint. Margaret stopped writing. He wasn't curious. He was collecting information. The room suddenly felt colder. I walked toward the kitchen and poured 2 cups of coffee. Neither of us touched them. After another hour, Margaret closed every folder. "Claire, I'm going to ask you a difficult question." I nodded. "Do you believe Daniel knows?" I wanted to answer immediately. I couldn't. Instead, I remembered dozens of little moments. Daniel insisting I never worried about work during family gatherings. Daniel volunteering to carry my laptop. Daniel once asking where I usually kept my security token. Daniel reminding me to leave work at the office. Back then, every gesture looked thoughtful. Tonight, each one acquired another meaning. "I don't know." Margaret watched my face. "That's an honest answer." "Unfortunately, it's also the most dangerous one." She explained why. "If Daniel planned this with them, He wasn't simply lying to me, he had been participating in a financial conspiracy. If he didn't know, then he's about to discover his own family has been using him too. Either possibility ended the marriage. Around 1 o'clock, my phone rang. Daniel. Again. Margaret motioned for me not to answer. It stopped, then rang again, then again. 3 calls in 6 minutes. A text appeared. Baby, why aren't you answering? Another. Dad says the bank called. Then another. Did something happen? Margaret raised one eyebrow. Interesting. I looked at her. What? They already know the bank detected something. My pulse quickened. How? Because whoever attempted to access your credentials received an error message. She smiled faintly. They're panicking. For the first time that night, I wasn't the one afraid. They were. Margaret took my phone. Don't reply. Every minute you stay silent, they reveal a little more about what they know. She was right. 10 minutes later, Richard Mercer called. He had never phoned me this late. Ever. I ignored it. Voicemail. Immediately. Then another call. Then Evelyn. Then Ethan. The entire Mercer family suddenly wanted to talk. Yesterday, they hadn't needed me. Tonight, they desperately did. Margaret quietly recorded every timestamp, every missed call, every voicemail notification. They're building evidence. No. They're destroying it. I frowned. She explained. Innocent people don't coordinate panic calls after midnight. Guilty people do. At 2:15 in the morning, Daniel finally left a voicemail. His breathing sounded uneven. Claire? Please? I need you to answer. My dad says there's been some misunderstanding with the bank. I don't know what's happening, but whatever it is, we can fix it. I listened twice. Margaret listened once, then looked at me. What did you hear? I heard someone who's scared. She nodded. I heard someone who already knows enough to be afraid. There was a difference. I wasn't sure which answer frightened me more. Before leaving, Margaret handed me a business card. On the back, she had written 3 words. Trust documentation. Not emotions, not promises, not explanations. Documentation. She placed one hand on my shoulder. Claire, tomorrow morning, they're going to fight to save themselves. Not you. Remember the difference. After she left, I stood alone in my apartment. The wedding dress still hung beside my bedroom door. Perfect. Untouched. Ready for a ceremony that would never happen. For several minutes, I simply looked at it. Then at my mother's veil, the tiny hand-sewn lace flowers caught the light. I remembered something she'd told me while sewing them. If you ever have to choose between keeping a marriage and keeping your integrity, choose integrity. A good marriage survives honesty. A bad one fears it. I gently folded the veil back into its box. Outside, the city slept. Inside, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit until now. I wasn't grieving the wedding. I was grieving the future I thought I had. And those are 2 very different losses. I didn't sleep. Not for even a minute. At 6 o'clock, my apartment filled with the pale gray light of an October morning. Today, I was supposed to become Mrs. Claire Mercer. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table wearing sweatpants, drinking cold coffee, while reading federal banking regulations. Funny how quickly priorities change. At 7:15, my phone exploded. Bridesmaids, hairstylist, wedding planner, the florist, Daniel, Richard, Evelyn. 32 missed calls in less than 20 minutes. Then the messages started. Where are you? Everyone's asking about you. The makeup artist is waiting. Claire, please answer. I muted everything. Margaret had given me one instruction before leaving. Make them wonder what you know. So I did. At exactly 8 o'clock, someone knocked. Not politely, 3 hard knocks. Then another 3. I looked through the peephole. Daniel. His tuxedo hung open. His tie was loose. His hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it all morning. For 5 years, I'd never seen him look frightened. I almost didn't recognize him. Claire, I know you're in there. His voice sounded exhausted. Please. We need to talk. I stayed silent. Another knock. I swear. I don't know everything my father has been doing. That sentence stopped me. Not because I believed him. Because of the way he phrased it. Not, my father didn't do anything. Instead, I don't know everything. Margaret had been right. Every panicked person tells the truth. One piece at a time. I opened the door. Only 6 inches. Nothing more. Daniel looked relieved. Then confused. I wasn't wearing a robe or bridal pajamas. I was wearing business clothes. White blouse, black slacks. The same outfit I wore when negotiating multi-million-dollar commercial loans. His eyes dropped to the legal folders stacked neatly on my dining table. What is all this? I have a question. I spoke before he could continue. Yesterday, at 4:18, who was inside your father's conference room? His expression froze. Only for half a second. But I saw it. People can control words. Almost nobody controls surprise. Dad had a meeting. With who? I don't know. Lawyers? Consultants. I wasn't paying attention. Lie. Not because I could prove it. Because Daniel Mercer never failed to notice details. It was one of the reasons I'd fallen in love with him. He remembered birthdays, favorite restaurants, the exact coffee order of everyone in his office, yet somehow, he couldn't remember who occupied his father's conference room the afternoon before his wedding. Impossible. He took one cautious step forward. Claire? My father said there was some problem with the bank. Whatever happened, we'll fix it. Together, there it was. Together. The word suddenly sounded dangerous. I looked directly into his eyes. Did you know someone tried using my credentials yesterday? Color drained from his face. I just found out this morning. Interesting. I hadn't told him what the problem was. Neither had the bank. Yet, he already knew it involved my credentials. He realized his mistake immediately. His shoulders stiffened. Richard told you that? I asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. Silence answered for him, behind him. The elevator doors opened. Richard Mercer stepped into the hallway, still wearing an expensive charcoal suit, still perfectly groomed. If I hadn't known better, I'd have thought he was heading into a board meeting. Instead, he was walking toward the collapse of everything he'd built. Claire. His smile appeared exactly on schedule. Measured, professional. Can we have a private conversation? No. I think we should. No. His smile never moved. I understand you're upset. But there seems to have been a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. The favorite word of guilty people. I folded my arms. So you deny attempting to access my banking credentials? His smile disappeared. Finally, not dramatically, just enough. I think you're making assumptions. I think you're avoiding answers. For the first time in 5 years, Richard Mercer looked at me, not like a future daughter-in-law, but like an obstacle. His voice hardened. Claire, do you understand what's at stake today? 500 guests, business partners, investors, family. I nodded. I do. And do you understand what's at stake for me? He didn't respond. My banking license, my career, my freedom, my mother's name. Every sentence landed harder than the last. Daniel looked between us. Dad, tell me what she's talking about. Richard didn't even look at him. That, more than anything, caught my attention. He wasn't trying to reassure his own son. He was calculating damage. Margaret had once told me something about white-collar criminals. When everything starts collapsing, they stop protecting people. They protect assets. I was watching it happen. Richard finally spoke. Claire, if you walk away today, people will ask questions. I almost smiled. They already should. His jaw tightened. I can make this right. How? He hesitated. For exactly 1 second. 1 second, too long. I'll explain everything after the ceremony. After the ceremony, not now. After I became legally connected to their family. After photographs. After witnesses. After signatures. After the escape routes became much smaller. No, I answered simply. There won't be a ceremony. Daniel stared at me. What? I'm canceling the wedding. The hallway fell completely silent. Even the elevator doors seemed to stop making noise. Richard recovered first. You aren't thinking clearly. I've never thought more clearly in my life. Daniel stepped forward. Claire? Please. If this is about the loan, We can't explain. There, another mistake. I never mentioned a loan. He had, which meant he knew exactly which file the bank had frozen. I looked at him for a long moment, not with anger, not even with sadness, just recognition. The man standing in front of me wasn't the man I'd spent 5 years loving. Maybe he never had been. I quietly reached behind the door, picked up a large manila envelope, and held it out. Richard frowned. What is this? My attorney asked me to give you this. He slowly opened it. Inside was a single page. At the top, in bold letters, Notice of Evidence Preservation. His face changed instantly. Not panic, not rage. Something much worse. Recognition. Because only guilty people recognize exactly why evidence suddenly matters. Daniel looked over his father's shoulder. What does this mean? Richard folded the paper without answering. For the first time, I noticed something extraordinary. Daniel looked genuinely confused. Not pretending, actually confused. Which meant one terrifying possibility had just become very real. Richard hadn't trusted his own son with the full plan either. He'd simply used him, exactly the way he'd planned to use me. And Daniel was only realizing it now. Daniel looked at his father. Dad, what is this? Richard didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slipped the legal notice back into the envelope with slow, deliberate movements. The same way he'd probably handled every crisis during 40 years in business. Control the room first, deal with the facts later. Claire, his voice was calm again. You've involved attorneys. That was unnecessary, I almost laughed. No. What was unnecessary, it was trying to turn me into your insurance policy. For the first time, Evelyn Mercer stepped out of the elevator. She was still wearing the elegant navy dress she'd chosen for the ceremony. Pearl earrings, perfect makeup, the image of a proud mother waiting to watch her son get married. Until she saw my face, then Richard's, then the envelope. Her smile disappeared. What happened? Richard answered without looking at her. Nothing we can't solve. She believed him immediately. I didn't. Daniel looked from one parent to the other. Will somebody tell me what's going on? Nobody answered. That silence said more than any confession could. Finally, he looked at me. Claire? Please. What aren't they telling me? I reached into my folder, pulled out the printed loan summary. Not the entire package, just enough. I handed it to him. His eyes scanned the first page, then the financial projections, then the signature page. When he reached my typed name, he stopped breathing. What? He looked at Richard. Dad, you told me legal was updating the paperwork. Richard's expression never changed. It was being updated. Daniel held up the page. With Claire's approval, no answer. His voice rose. You told me the bank already knew. Still nothing. Daniel's hands began shaking. You used her credentials? Richard finally spoke. I used an opportunity. Those 4 words echoed through the hallway. Not denial, not apology. A justification. Daniel stared at his father as though seeing him for the first time. You forged her identity? Richard sighed. It wasn't finished. The bank stopped the process. As you can see, no harm was done. No harm. I felt something inside me become perfectly still. There are moments when people accidentally reveal exactly who they are. Richard Mercer had just reduced the destruction of someone's career to an inconvenience. Daniel took 2 slow steps backward. You were going to let me marry her. Richard looked directly at him. That was always the plan. So she'd become part of the company. So she'd protect the company. No, Richard corrected him. So she'd protect the family. There it was. Not love, not marriage, not partnership. Utility. I suddenly understood why Richard had liked me from the beginning. Not because I was kind, not because I loved his son, because I possessed something his company desperately needed. Credibility, a spotless banking reputation, professional access. And once I carried the Mercer name, every conflict of interest would become infinitely harder to untangle. Daniel whispered, You never told me any of this. Richard's eyes narrowed. I told you everything you needed to know. That sentence shattered whatever remained between father and son. Daniel slowly looked back at me. His face had gone pale. I swear. I didn't know about this. I searched his eyes, looking for manipulation, excuses, performance. Instead, I saw something unexpected. Humiliation. Not because he'd lost me, because he'd finally realized. His own father had used him as another piece on the board. Evelyn finally spoke. Richard. This wasn't what we discussed. He turned toward her. We discussed survival. Our company has 600 employees. If that financing failed, people would have lost jobs. He sounded almost righteous, as if noble intentions erased criminal behavior. Margaret had warned me about people like him. They never see themselves as villains. They simply believe their goals justify everyone else's sacrifice. The elevator opened again. This time, Margaret stepped out, exactly on time. She carried another folder, walked straight past everyone, and stood beside me. Mr. Mercer. Richard recognized her instantly. His confidence slipped, only slightly, but enough. Margaret. I didn't expect to see you. I imagine there are many things you didn't expect today. She handed him a second envelope. This contains formal notice that all relevant evidence has been preserved. Copies have also been delivered elsewhere. Richard accepted it, but didn't open it. He already knew. Margaret continued calmly. My client will not be attending today's ceremony, nor will she have any further direct communication with members of the Mercer family. If necessary, future communication will occur during discovery. Discovery. One legal word. An entire universe of consequences. Daniel looked between us. Discovery? Margaret met his eyes. If litigation becomes necessary. He looked physically sick. No. It doesn't have to become that, Richard interrupted. It won't. Margaret smiled politely. That depends entirely on what investigators discover. The hallway became silent again. Finally, Richard made his last move. He looked directly at me. Claire, you can destroy everything today. My company, my family, my son's future. But ask yourself one question. Will it make you happier? I answered without hesitation. This isn't about happiness. It's about accountability. And those are not the same thing, he nodded once, as though he'd expected that answer. Then, for the first time, Richard Mercer lost, not loudly, not dramatically. He simply turned around and walked back toward the elevator, without another word, without another argument, without looking back, because he finally understood. There was nothing left to negotiate. Daniel didn't follow him, neither did Evelyn. He remained standing in the hallway, looking at the closed elevator doors, like a little boy who had just discovered his hero had never existed. After nearly a minute, he turned toward me. I'm sorry, his voice broke. I know, I answered quietly. But you're apologizing for the wrong thing, he frowned. You should be apologizing to yourself for spending your whole life believing that love and loyalty meant obeying the wrong people. His eyes filled. I almost cried too. Because in another life, without Richard Mercer, perhaps Daniel could have become the man I believed he was. But that life didn't exist, and I no longer had the luxury of loving someone's potential. I had to live with their reality. I gently closed my apartment door, leaving Daniel alone in the hallway, not as punishment, but because some journeys must be walked alone. The wedding was supposed to begin at 11. At 10:58, I stood at my apartment window. Somewhere across Milwaukee, 500 guests were probably checking their watches. The florist had already arranged thousands of white roses. The string quartet had likely finished tuning their instruments. The photographer was probably wondering why the bride hadn't arrived. For years, I believed that canceling a wedding would be the most humiliating day of my life. Instead, it became the day I finally stopped betraying myself. Margaret's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. It's the FBI. I looked up. The bank filed a suspicious activity report as soon as they confirmed the attempted credential misuse. She answered, spoke for less than 2 minutes, then ended the call. They're executing search warrants. I blinked. Already? She nodded. Bank fraud involving federally insured institutions moves very quickly. They don't wait until Monday. Outside, church bells echoed across downtown. 11 o'clock, somewhere. The ceremony officially began, without a bride, without a groom, without a future. My phone buzzed. Not Daniel, not Richard, Sienna, my oldest friend. Turn on the local news. Confused, I grabbed the remote. Every local station had interrupted regular programming. A helicopter hovered above Mercer Infrastructure headquarters. Federal agents were walking through the front entrance carrying evidence boxes. Reporters crowded behind police barricades. The anchor spoke carefully. Federal investigators executed search warrants this morning as part of an ongoing financial fraud investigation involving Mercer Infrastructure. No names, no accusations, just facts, exactly the way investigations begin. Margaret quietly muted the television. You don't need to watch this. She was right. Whatever happened next no longer required me. Around noon, Daniel called. This time, I answered. Not because I wanted closure, because I wanted the truth. His voice sounded hollow. They searched my father's office. I know. They took computers. I know. A long silence. Then, I didn't know, Claire. I believe you. He started crying, not loudly, just enough that I could hear him trying to hide it. I should have asked more questions. Yes, I should have protected you. Yes, I should have protected myself. I closed my eyes. Yes. Another silence. Then he asked the question that mattered most. Can you ever forgive me? I thought for a long time. Long enough that he didn't interrupt. Finally, I answered honestly. I already do. He inhaled sharply. But forgiveness isn't the same as trust. And trust doesn't grow back just because someone is sorry. He didn't argue. I understand. I hope someday you find someone who deserves you. I smiled sadly. I hope someday you become someone who deserves yourself. We ended the call. Neither of us said goodbye. We didn't need to. Some endings don't require final words, only acceptance. 6 months later, Mercer Infrastructure no longer existed. The company entered bankruptcy after investigators uncovered years of fraudulent financial reporting. Several executives accepted plea agreements. Richard Mercer was indicted on multiple federal charges related to bank fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Evelyn quietly moved to Arizona to live with her sister. I never saw her again. As for Daniel, I heard he took a job as a project manager for a small construction company 2 states away. No executive title, no family empire, no shortcuts. For the first time in his life, he would have to build something with his own hands. Part of me hoped he would. As for me, I stayed exactly where I belonged. The bank completed its internal investigation. Every digital record proved what I'd known from the beginning. My credentials had been targeted, not used by me, protected by me. 3 months later, I was promoted to regional credit director. During the announcement, my CEO said something I'll never forget. Integrity is the one qualification that can't be taught. We're fortunate Claire reminded all of us what that looks like. I accepted the promotion, not because I'd won, because I'd survived without compromising who I was. Almost a year later, I visited my mother's grave. I brought fresh white lilies, the same flowers she loved planting every spring. I sat beside the headstone for nearly an hour, talking about ordinary things. My new office, a trip to Montana I'd finally taken, the rescue dog I'd adopted, a stubborn golden retriever named Cooper who believed every squirrel was a personal enemy. Then I placed my hand on the cool granite. Mom, you were right. I should have read everything twice. A breeze moved through the cemetery, gentle, warm, almost like someone smoothing my hair the way she used to. I smiled, not because life had become perfect, because it had become honest. People often ask whether I regret canceling my wedding. The answer surprises them. I don't regret canceling it. I regret ignoring the small warnings that came long before. Because betrayal rarely arrives like a lightning strike. It arrives disguised as convenience, as trust, as don't worry about it, as we're family now. If I had learned anything, it was this. Love should never require you to lower your professional standards. Family should never ask you to sacrifice your integrity. And anyone who truly loves you will never need your blindness to keep loving them. The wedding never happened. The marriage never began. But my life finally did. If you're listening to my story today, and something deep inside you keeps whispering that something isn't right, please don't silence that voice just because you're afraid of disappointing other people. A canceled wedding can cost money. A fraudulent marriage can cost your future. Looking back now, I no longer remember the venue, or the flowers, or the menu we spent months choosing. The only thing I remember clearly is the moment I chose myself. And strangely enough, that wasn't the day my heart broke. It was the day I finally stopped letting other people decide what my life was worth.